She caught her billionaire CEO husband with his mistress in a 5-star hotel. Until he found out she owned the place. "You brought your mistress to my hotel." Isabella's voice cut through the golden lobby like a blade through silk. "To the suite I designed, in the building I own. You used money you have because I made sure you had opportunities. And you repaid me by bringing another woman to my property." Marcus's hand went to his face where the slap still burned. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The blonde beside him stumbled backward, her designer heels clicking against marble floors that belonged to the wife she didn't know existed. "Terry, please." Marcus finally found his voice. It cracked like glass under pressure. "Just let me explain." "Explain what?" Isabella stepped closer. The crowd in the lobby had gone silent. 200 guests at the gallery opening, all watching the collapse of a man who thought he knew his wife. "Explain how long you've been lying to me. How many times you've touched her with the same hands that touched me. How you looked at my work, my actual soul on these walls, and never once recognized it because you never actually saw me." The security team moved in. Efficient, professional, silent. Isabella turned to them without breaking eye contact with Marcus. "Remove him, both of them, permanently. Ban them from every property in the Harrington portfolio. All of them, worldwide." "Isabella, wait." Marcus reached for her. She stepped back like his touch was poison. Don't touch me. Don't speak to me. Don't exist in my space for one more second." Have you ever made yourself smaller for someone you loved? Have you ever hidden your success because you were afraid of intimidating your partner? Have you ever given everything to someone who couldn't see your worth because they were too busy looking at what they thought they deserved? This is the story of a woman who built an empire in secret while her husband thought she was ordinary. A woman who loved a man completely while hiding herself entirely. A woman who discovered betrayal in the one place that represented everything she actually was. And this is the story of what happened when the truth finally, devastatingly, came to light. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever hidden your light for someone else, if you have ever wondered what happens when the mask finally comes off, you need to hear this story. Hit that like button right now because what you're about to witness is the most satisfying revelation you'll ever see. And subscribe to Cedar Light Love Stories because we're just getting started. And trust me, you don't want to miss a single moment of what comes next. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 7 years before that confrontation. 7 years before the empire was revealed. 7 years before everything shattered. The gallery smelled of privilege and pretense. Champagne, expensive perfume, the particular musk of people who believed their presence made art more valuable. Isabella Rossi stood at the edge of the crowd, her fingers wrapped around a glass of sparkling water she hadn't tasted, watching strangers dissect her soul and hang price tags on her heartbreak. Nobody knew her here. That was by design. The paintings on the walls, massive canvases that bled color and chaos and terrible, beautiful truth. They belonged to Im Rossi, the pseudonymous artist whose identity the art world had been trying to uncover for 7 years. Critics called her a genius. Collectors paid millions for pieces she created in the dark hours when sleep felt like surrender. Museums fought for the privilege of displaying her vision, and Isabella stood among them. Invisible, wearing a simple black dress from a department store, her wedding ring the only jewelry on her body, listening to people explain her own work back to her with confident ignorance. The artist is clearly commenting on the commodification of feminine rage. A man in a $1,000 suit declared to his companion. He gestured at her largest piece, a canvas she'd painted the night after her father's funeral, when grief felt like drowning. Isabella said nothing. She'd learned long ago that correction was pointless. People saw what they needed to see, believed what made them comfortable, constructed narratives that flattered their intelligence. Just like Marcus, her husband of 6 years, Marcus Donovan. He believed he'd married a former art student who'd given up her dreams to support his career in finance. He believed she spent her days volunteering at local schools, teaching children to paint. Content with small domestic pleasures, he believed she was grateful for the life he provided. The modest but comfortable apartment in Brooklyn, the occasional weekend getaway, the stability his salary afforded. He believed she was simple, manageable. He had no idea that the woman who packed his lunch and kissed him goodbye each morning was the same artist whose work hung in the Guggenheim, whose pieces sold for 7 figures, whose name, her real name, was whispered in reverence in galleries from New York to Tokyo. Isabella had hidden herself so completely that she'd almost forgotten who she was underneath the disguise. Almost, but that morning had been different. That morning, she'd woken up and decided 7 years of hiding was enough. 7 years of pretending was over. Tonight, at this gallery opening, Rossi would finally step into the light, and Isabella would finally show Marcus the truth. All of it. She'd imagined his face, the shock, the pride, the overwhelming realization that he'd been married to someone extraordinary all along. She'd imagined him pulling her close, whispering that he'd always known she was special, that he'd love her even more now that he could see all of her. She'd been so naive. "Darling, this piece is extraordinary." A woman's voice floated toward Isabella, cultured and affected. The artist must have experienced profound loss to create something this raw. Isabella turned slightly, prepared to offer a polite non-response, and felt her entire world fracture. Marcus stood 15 feet away, his arm around a woman who couldn't have been older than 25. She was beautiful in that uncomplicated way, blonde, polished, wearing a dress that cost more than Marcus allegedly made in a month. She gazed up at him with the kind of adoration Isabella remembered giving him once, in another lifetime, before she'd learned that love unreturned becomes a weight that crushes you. Isabella's glass of sparkling water slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the marble floor. The sound cut through the gallery chatter like a gunshot. Marcus turned at the noise. Their eyes met across the space. Isabella watched the color drain from his face like someone had opened a valve, watched him recognize her, then glance around frantically at the paintings, at the discreet Rossi signatures in the corners, at the program in his hand that announced the artist's first public appearance tonight, watched him understand. Marcus, the blonde, tugged at his arm, her voice uncertain now. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I need to go." Marcus's voice emerged, strangled. "We need to go. Now." But the gallery director was already moving to the small stage. The lights dimmed slightly. A spotlight illuminated the speaking area. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director's voice rose above the chatter, commanding attention. "It is my profound honor to finally introduce you to the artist whose work has captivated us all. The mysterious, the brilliant, the incomparable Rossi. Please welcome Isabella Maria Rossi." The applause started before Isabella could process what was happening. Her feet moved automatically, carrying her toward the stage, away from Marcus, away from the blonde, toward the moment she'd been planning for months and now wished she could unmake. She climbed the steps, each one feeling like a mile. From the stage, she could see everything. The crowd of collectors and critics and social climbers who'd paid $500 a ticket to be here. The paintings that represented 7 years of hiding, creating, building an empire while pretending to be content with crumbs. And Marcus, frozen near the back, the blonde tugging at his arm, confusion and concern playing across her pretty, uncomplicated face. Isabella gripped the microphone, her hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "Thank you for being here." Her voice filled the gallery. Clear, strong. "For 7 years, I've hidden behind initials and anonymity, not out of shyness, but out of fear. Fear that being seen, truly seen, would cost me something I wasn't ready to lose." She paused, finding Marcus in the crowd, holding his gaze with the full weight of everything unspoken between them. "Tonight, I'm done hiding. Tonight, you get to see all of me. And I get to see exactly who's been paying attention." The crowd murmured with interest, sensing drama, hungry for the story behind the art. They thought she was talking about artistic vulnerability, about the courage required to step into the light. Only Marcus knew the truth. Isabella descended from the stage as the gallery director announced she would take questions. She moved through the crowd with purpose, watching Marcus try to retreat, watching the blonde's confusion deepen as she sensed something terribly wrong. They met near the painting Isabella had created last month, a canvas dominated by shadows and a single figure walking away. Titled, "The Architecture of Absence." Isabella. Marcus's voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know." Didn't know what? Isabella kept her voice low, aware of the crowd around them, of the performance required. "That your wife was Rossi? That this gallery, this building, belongs to me? That the simple art teacher you married owns 17 properties in Manhattan and has a net worth that makes your salary look like pocket change?" The blonde gasped softly. Marcus's hand fell from her waist. "Or did you mean?" Isabella's eyes flicked to the young woman. "You didn't know I'd be here tonight? That when you brought her to my exhibition, to admire my work, to celebrate my art, you didn't think you'd actually have to face me? Please." Marcus's voice cracked. "Not here. Let me explain." "Explain what?" Isabella felt something cold and final settle into her bones. "Explain how long you've been lying to me. How many times you've touched her with the same hands that touched me. How you looked at my work, my actual soul on these walls, and never once recognized it because you never actually saw me?" She turned to the blonde, who looked ready to flee. "What did he tell you about his wife? That I was simple, boring, content with a small life while he provided?" The young woman's silence was answer enough. Isabella pulled her phone from her small clutch, typed a rapid message. Within seconds, her head of security appeared at her elbow. Discreet, but unmistakable. "Escort Mr. Donovan and his guest out," Isabella said clearly, quietly, "and ensure they're added to the permanent ban list for all my properties. Every single one." "Isabella, wait." Marcus reached for her. She stepped back. "Don't touch me. Don't speak to me. Don't exist in my space for one more second." Security moved in, professional and efficient. The crowd watched with barely concealed fascination as Marcus Donovan, whose wife apparently owned the gallery, the building, possibly half the block, was escorted out like a trespasser in his own wife's empire. Only when he was gone did Isabella allow herself to breathe. The gallery director approached carefully, concern etched across his features. "Ms. Rossi, are you—" "I'm perfect." Isabella's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Shall we continue? I believe there were questions about my work." She spent the next 2 hours being brilliant, answering questions with wit and insight. Charming collectors, selling 3 paintings for a combined $8 million. She was gracious and mysterious and exactly the kind of artistic genius people wanted her to be. And inside, she was disintegrating. When the gallery finally emptied, when the last guests left clutching their catalog and their story about the night they met the real Rossi, Isabella dismissed her staff and stood alone among her paintings. 7 years of hiding. 7 years of making herself smaller. 7 years of believing that if she could just be uncomplicated enough, if she could just need little enough, if she could just love perfectly enough, it would be enough. And it had never been enough, because Marcus had never wanted all of her. He'd wanted the edited version, the manageable wife, the woman who made him feel bigger by requiring so little. Isabella stood before her largest canvas, the one she'd painted the night after her father died, when grief and rage and terrible clarity had poured out of her in colors that still made her throat tight. And she let herself finally, completely break. She sank to the floor in her department store dress, surrounded by millions of dollars of her own pain transformed into art, and cried for the woman she'd been on their wedding day. The woman who'd believed love meant sacrifice. The woman who'd thought hiding her magnitude was the same as protecting their marriage. That woman was gone now, shattered like glass under the weight of Marcus's betrayal, and in her place, something cold and furious and absolutely done with being underestimated began to rise. Isabella pulled herself up, wiped her face, fixed her hair, and made a phone call that would change everything. "Richard," she said when her lawyer answered, "I need you to destroy someone, but let me take you back further, back to the beginning, because you need to understand how Isabella became the woman who could build an empire in secret, How she became the woman who could hide herself so completely. How she became the woman who would eventually watch her husband's world burn without flinching. Isabella Maria Rossi grew up in a house that felt like a museum. Cold, beautiful, full of priceless things you weren't allowed to touch. Her father, Antonio Rossi, had built a real estate empire that stretched from New York to Dubai. Her mother, Vivienne, was a French socialite who treated motherhood like an inconvenient hobby. Isabella learned early that love in her family was transactional, conditional, earned through achievement and lost through failure. She was 8 years old when she discovered painting. Her nanny took her to a local community center where an art class was in session. Isabella watched children, regular children whose parents weren't billionaires, create messy, joyful chaos on canvas. No rules, no expectations, just pure expression. She was transfixed. "Can I try?" Isabella asked the teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen, who saw the hunger in this expensively dressed child's eyes. "Of course, sweetheart." Mrs. Chen handed her a brush. "There's no wrong way to paint. Just put what you feel onto the canvas. What you feel." The concept was revolutionary to 8-year-old Isabella, who'd been taught to suppress feelings, to present only carefully curated versions of herself to the world. She painted that day for 3 hours, lost in color and possibility. When her nanny finally pulled her away, Isabella was covered in paint and happier than she'd ever been. That night at dinner, she told her parents about the art class. "Art is a hobby, not a career," Antonio said, without looking up from his meal. "You'll study business and law. You'll join the company. This discussion is over." Vivienne merely nodded, agreeing as she always did with whatever Antonio declared. But Isabella didn't stop painting. She did it in secret. In her room late at night, in the garden when her parents were away, she developed a skill that would define her life, the ability to hide the parts of herself that others found inconvenient. By the time she was 16, Isabella was creating work that could have hung in galleries. But no one knew. Not her parents, not her schoolmates, not the tutors who prepared her for business school. Only Mrs. Chen knew, the art teacher who'd recognized genius in a lonely child and nurtured it quietly, without expectation, without trying to control or commodify it. When you create, you tell the truth. Mrs. Chen told Isabella during one of their secret sessions, "Art is the only language that can't lie. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you're hiding, it comes out on the canvas whether you want it to or not." Those words would haunt Isabella for years. Her father died when she was 22. Sudden heart attack, no warning. One moment, he was negotiating a deal in London. The next, he was gone. And Isabella inherited everything. The real estate empire, the properties, the investments, the crushing weight of expectations she'd never asked for. Her mother moved to Paris immediately after the funeral, relieved to escape the responsibility of running a company she'd never understood, leaving Isabella alone with an empire and no idea how to be herself while managing it. So she created a system, a structure that would protect both her inheritance and her identity. She put trusted managers in place, people her father had trained, people who could run the day-to-day operations. She created holding companies and shell corporations, layers of privacy that kept her name off public documents. She became a ghost in her own empire, present but invisible. And she painted under the name Rossi, her initials and her father's last name, the only tribute she could bear to give him. Her first gallery show was small, a local space in Brooklyn. 6 paintings, 2 sold. But a critic from the New York Times happened to stop by, and his review changed everything. Rossi paints like someone exorcising demons. The review read, "Each canvas is a battlefield between control and chaos, privilege and pain, the person we're supposed to be and the person we actually are. This is an artist to watch." The review went viral. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who Rossi was. Galleries called. Collectors offered obscene amounts of money. Museums requested meetings, and Isabella said no to all of it. She sold her work through a carefully selected dealer who honored her anonymity. She created on her own terms. She built a separate empire, this one of art and truth, parallel to the real estate empire she'd inherited. She was 25, wealthy beyond measure, successful in two completely different fields, and desperately, crushingly lonely. That's when she met Marcus. The train to Washington hummed on the tracks. Isabella sat by the window with a book of poetry she wasn't reading. She was heading to a real estate conference. Another obligation, another performance of being Antonio Rossi's daughter instead of herself. Is this seat taken? She looked up, found herself staring at a man who looked like he belonged in old movies. Strong jaw, easy smile, eyes that crinkled at the corners like they'd spent a lifetime finding reasons to be happy. It's a free country, Isabella said, immediately regretting how cold it sounded. The man laughed anyway, a genuine sound that filled the empty spaces between them. Fair enough, I'll take that as a yes. He settled into the seat across from her, all relaxed confidence and rumpled charm. His suit was off the rack, but well fitted. His watch was modest. His hands looked like they knew what real work felt like. Gary, he said, extending his hand. Gary Culpa. Isabella hesitated for a heartbeat, then took his hand. His grip was firm, honest, the kind of handshake her father taught her to respect. Terry, she said, using her middle name, the one no one called her. Terry Walters. It was the first lie, but it felt like freedom. Nice to meet you, Terry Walters. Gary smiled wider, settling back into his seat as the train began to move. So what takes you to Washington? Business or pleasure? Does anyone actually go to Washington for pleasure? Isabella allowed herself the smallest smile. Fair point. Gary pulled out a thermos from his bag, unscrewed the top. The rich smell of good coffee filled their corner of the world. Want some? I made too much this morning and I hate waste. Everything in Isabella's careful, controlled life told her to say no. To put her earbuds in, open her book, create the fortress of solitude she'd perfected over the years. But something in the way he offered, no ulterior motive, no calculation, just simple human kindness, made her nod. Sure. Thank you. He poured coffee into the thermos cap and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed for a moment, and Isabella felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Not attraction, not exactly, more like recognition, like her soul had been waiting in a train station for years. And finally, something familiar had arrived. The coffee was perfect, rich but not bitter, strong but not harsh, the kind of coffee that tasted like someone had actually cared about making it right. She told him so. My mom's recipe, Gary said, his whole face softening at the mention. She says life's too short for bad coffee and fake people. I try to live by that. Your mother sounds wise. She is. Raised me on her own after my dad died. Taught me that the measure of a person isn't what they have, it's what they give. He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. Sorry, I don't usually get philosophical before noon. Something about trains makes me contemplative. Don't apologize, Isabella said quietly. I like it. Most people fill silence with noise. You fill it with something real. Gary's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. A current. A connection. The beginning of something neither could name yet. So Terry Walters, who reads poetry on trains and appreciates good coffee, tell me something true about yourself. Isabella's instinct was to deflect, to offer something safe and meaningless. Instead, she heard herself say the truth. I'm tired of being who everyone needs me to be. I'm tired of living in boxes I didn't build. I'm tired of being lonely in rooms full of people. Gary didn't look away, didn't offer empty platitudes, didn't try to fix what she hadn't asked him to fix. He just nodded slowly and said, yeah, I know that feeling. For the next hour, they talked about nothing and everything. Gary told her about his childhood in Boston, about the mother who raised him alone after his father died, about the neighborhood where everybody knew everybody and doors stayed unlocked. He talked about his work, consulting, helping people find the right properties, building something solid and meaningful one client at a time. He didn't brag, didn't inflate, didn't perform. He just talked like a man who knew who he was and didn't need to be anyone else. I help families find homes, he said simply. Not houses, homes, places where they can build lives, raise kids, grow old together. It's not glamorous, but it matters. At least I think it does. It does, Isabella said firmly. Creating spaces where people can be safe, be themselves, be loved. That's everything that matters. Gary studied her face like he was memorizing it. You get it. Most people don't get that. Isabella found herself talking too, carefully editing the truth, but not lying. She told him about growing up in a big cold house where love was implied but never spoken, about feeling invisible in rooms full of people, about taking a train because sometimes you needed to move through the world slowly, needed to see the landscape change gradually instead of blinking and finding yourself somewhere else entirely. What's your favorite building? Gary asked suddenly. Everyone has one. That building that makes them stop and stare. Isabella thought about the question, about the hundreds of buildings she owned, the architectural masterpieces in her portfolio. But she found herself describing the old library in her childhood neighborhood, the one with the stone lions and the reading room that smelled like old books and possibility. It's not the fanciest building, she said, but it's the first place I ever felt like I belonged, like I could be anybody, do anything, like my life was bigger than what everyone told me it should be. That's beautiful, Gary said softly. Buildings aren't just structures, they're containers for dreams. Nobody had ever said anything like that to Isabella before. Nobody in her world talked about dreams. They talked about returns, acquisitions, market penetration. But Gary talked about buildings like they were love letters to the future. And something in Isabella's chest cracked open. You sound like someone who's been running from something, Gary said quietly, his eyes gentle with understanding rather than judgment. Isabella's throat tightened. Or maybe running toward something. I haven't figured out which yet. Maybe both, Gary suggested. Maybe you're running from who you were expected to be and toward who you actually are. That's not cowardice. That's courage. The hours dissolved like sugar in warm tea. The landscape outside shifted from city to suburbs to something in between. But Isabella barely noticed. She was too busy discovering that conversation could be this easy, this natural, this necessary. Somewhere around Philadelphia, Gary ordered sandwiches from the cafe car and insisted on paying despite Isabella's protest. They ate and talked about books, about music, about the strange comfort of diners at midnight, and the specific joy of finding a song that feels like it was written just for you. I was engaged once, Gary said suddenly, staring out the window at the blurred landscape. 3 years ago, she was beautiful, smart, had her whole life planned out like a military operation. I thought that's what I wanted too, someone who had all the answers. What happened? Isabella asked, surprised by how much she wanted to know. I realized I didn't want answers. I wanted questions. I wanted someone who'd sit on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. and wonder about things with me. She wanted certainty. I wanted possibility. He turned back to Isabella. Something in his eyes made her heart beat faster. Took me a long time to understand I wasn't looking for perfect. I was looking for real. Real is harder than perfect, Isabella said quietly. Perfect, you can control. Real is terrifying. Exactly. Gary leaned forward, elbows on the table. Have you ever met someone and felt like you'd known them forever? Like your soul recognized them before your brain caught up? Isabella's breath caught. Yes, I'm feeling it right now. The admission hung between them, honest and raw, and impossibly vulnerable. Gary reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Not possessive, not presumptuous, just connected. Me too, he said simply. They talked until the light outside shifted from afternoon gold to evening amber. They talked about childhood dreams and adult disappointments, about the gap between who we're supposed to be and who we actually are, about loneliness and longing, and the specific ache of living in a world that doesn't quite fit. What do you want, Terry? Gary asked as the train neared Washington. If you could have anything, be anything, what would it be? Isabella looked at this stranger who felt like home. This man who'd somehow seen past every wall she'd built and told him the truth. I want to be known, really known, not for what I can do or what I have, but for who I am when all the armor comes off. I want someone to see me, all of me, and stay anyway. Then I hope you find that, Gary said softly. You deserve that. The train began slowing as Washington approached. Isabella felt panic rise in her chest. This strange, unexpected connection was about to end, and she'd go back to being the woman nobody knew, the woman hiding behind walls of her own construction. Gary must have felt it too because he reached across the table, his hand palm up, waiting. I know this is crazy. We just met. You probably think I'm some kind of lunatic, but can I have your number? Can I take you to dinner when you're back in New York? Can I see you again? Isabella looked at his open hand, at the hope in his eyes, at this man who talked about his mother and bad coffee and wanting something real. Every instinct she'd honed over the years screamed at her to protect herself, to stay hidden, to keep the world at arm's length. She pulled a pen from her bag and wrote her private number on his palm, the ink bleeding slightly into the lines of his skin. Not her office number, not her assistant's line, her actual number, the one almost nobody had, the one that connected directly to her without filters or intermediaries. Call me, she said softly. Please call me. Gary's smile could have lit the entire eastern seaboard. I will. I promise. Tomorrow. I'll call you tomorrow. Not tomorrow, Isabella said, surprising herself. Tonight. Call me tonight. I want to hear your voice when I'm alone, and remembering this conversation, and wondering if I imagined how good it felt. Gary's eyes widened. Something vulnerable crossed his face. You didn't imagine it. This is real. Whatever this is, it's real. When the train stopped and they gathered their things, they stood on the platform for a long moment, neither wanting to be the first to leave. Finally, Gary pulled her into a hug, brief but warm, the kind of embrace that felt like coming home. Until tonight, he whispered against her hair. Until tonight. Isabella echoed. She walked away, feeling like she'd left something crucial behind. Or maybe like she'd finally found something she didn't know she'd been searching for. She glanced back once, found Gary still standing there, watching her, his hand raised in a wave that looked like a promise. Isabella raised her hand back, and then she turned the corner, and he was gone. But not really gone, because that night, true to his word, Gary called, and they talked until dawn about everything and nothing, building a connection that felt inevitable and impossible and absolutely necessary. She didn't know that the man whose voice filled her lonely hotel room would become her husband. She didn't know that she'd love him more than she'd ever loved anything. She didn't know that he would break her so completely that she'd have to destroy him just to survive. She just knew that for the first time in her carefully controlled life, she wanted to take a risk. She wanted to let someone in. She wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be loved for who she actually was. Not for what she owned, not for what she could give, but for the woman behind the walls who was tired of being invisible. And for a little while, she would believe it. For a little while, it would even be true. Their first date was at a small restaurant in Brooklyn, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and wine served in water glasses. Gary arrived early, his hair still damp from the shower, wearing a button-down shirt he'd clearly ironed himself, missing a spot near the collar. Isabella found it endearing, this small evidence of effort, of care. You look beautiful, he said when she arrived, and the way he said it, like he was stating a fact rather than offering a compliment, made her believe him. They ordered too much food and ate too little of it, too busy talking to remember to chew. Gary told her about the apartment building he was trying to save from demolition, how it housed families who'd lived there for generations, how he was working with the community to find solutions. His passion was evident in every gesture, every word. He cared about people, about legacy, about doing things the right way, even when the wrong way was easier. Isabella told him about her love of old architecture, about walking through the city late at night when the buildings revealed their true faces. She didn't tell him she owned several of those buildings. She didn't tell him that her family name was carved into the foundations of half the city's landmarks. She just talked about the beauty of spaces built to last, of craftsmanship that valued permanence over profit. "You see things different than most people," Gary said, reaching across the table to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Like you're reading a book everyone else is just looking at the cover of." When dinner ended, neither wanted the night to finish. They walked through Brooklyn, hands finding each other like magnets, talking about everything and nothing. Gary stopped suddenly under a streetlight and pulled her close. "I know this is fast," he said, his forehead touching hers, "but I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to find you." Isabella's breath caught. Nobody had ever looked at her the way Gary did, like she was both mystery and answer, question and solution, everything he'd been searching for without knowing it. "Then stop waiting," she whispered, and kissed him. The kiss was different from anything Isabella had experienced, not rushed or demanding, but patient, exploring, like Gary was memorizing every detail. His hand cupped her face with such tenderness that tears pricked her eyes. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, existing in a bubble where only they mattered. The months that followed felt like falling and flying at the same time. Gary took her to street fairs and jazz clubs and diners where the coffee was terrible but the pie was transcendent. He introduced her to his mother, Elena, a woman with steel in her spine and kindness in her eyes, who hugged Isabella like she'd been waiting her whole life to meet her. "You're good for him," Elena whispered while Gary was getting their coats. "I see the way he looks at you, like you're the answer to every question he forgot to ask." Their second month together, Gary took Isabella to a neighborhood carnival. They rode the Ferris wheel, and at the top, with the city spread beneath them like scattered jewels, he kissed her like he was claiming her soul. It was gentle, questioning, like he was asking permission even as he gave himself. Isabella kissed him back with years of loneliness dissolving in that single moment. "I could fall in love with you," Gary whispered against her lips. "I think I'm already there," Isabella admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "I love you too." They spent entire weekends in his small apartment, cooking meals together, dancing to old records. Gary taught her how to make his mother's sauce, stirring the pot with patience while telling stories about Sunday dinners, where everyone talked over everyone, and love was served alongside pasta. Isabella absorbed every detail, storing them like precious artifacts from a life she'd never known. One rainy Sunday, they stayed in bed until afternoon. Wrapped in sheets and each other, Gary traced the line of her spine with his fingertips, so light it felt like whispers on her skin. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," he said softly. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her face buried in his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I've spent my whole life feeling like I'm too much and not enough at the same time. Too complicated for simple happiness, not simple enough for real connection." Gary tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're not too much. You're not too little. You're exactly right. For me, you're exactly right." She believed him. God help her. She believed every word. They made love slowly that afternoon, with rain drumming against the windows and the world reduced to just their breathing, their touching, their complete surrender to each other. Gary worshipped her body like it was holy, kissed every inch of her skin like he was memorizing a map he never wanted to forget. Isabella had been with men before, but never like this, never with someone who saw her, really saw her, even if he didn't see everything. Afterward, lying tangled together, Gary whispered into her hair, "I love you. I know it's too soon to say it, but I do. I love you, Terry Walters." Isabella felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight for years. "I love you too, so much it scares me." "Don't be scared," Gary said, pulling her closer. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." She started keeping clothes at his place, leaving little pieces of herself in his space, a toothbrush, a favorite sweater, the book she was reading. Gary noticed each edition with quiet joy, never pushing for more, but clearly treasuring every sign that she was becoming part of his world. He left notes for her, tucked in her coat pocket, slipped into her book, waiting on the bathroom mirror. You make my coffee taste better. I love the way you sing in the shower. Thank you for choosing me. Isabella saved every single one, hiding them in a box she kept in her actual penthouse. Proof that this was real, that someone loved the version of herself she'd chosen to show him. On their 5th month together, Gary surprised her with a weekend getaway to a small cabin upstate. No plans, no schedule, just them and woods and silence. They spent the days hiking and the nights making love by the fireplace, talking about dreams and fears and futures. If you could have anything, Gary asked one night, firelight dancing across his face, what would it be? Terry almost laughed. She had everything already. Money, power, influence. But she looked at Gary, at this good man who loved her without knowing the full truth, and said this, exactly this. Someone who sees me and stays. Then you have it, Gary said simply. Because I see you, Terry Walters, and I'm not going anywhere. The tragedy of it all was that he meant it. In that moment, Gary genuinely believed he'd spend forever with her. He genuinely believed love was enough. He genuinely believed the woman he held was the complete picture, not a carefully edited version designed to protect both of them. The proposal came on a bridge at sunset, the city glowing behind them like a promise. Gary got down on one knee with a ring that was modest and perfect and chosen with such obvious care that Isabella's eyes filled with tears before he even spoke. I'm not rich, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I can't give you diamonds or mansions or trips to Paris, but I can give you every single morning for the rest of my life. I can give you honesty and partnership and a love that doesn't quit when things get hard. Terry Walters, will you marry me? She pulled him to his feet and kissed him like she was trying to memorize the taste of this moment. Yes, God, yes. They married in a courthouse with 2 strangers as witnesses, both of them grinning like teenagers running away from home. Isabella signed the papers as Terry Walters, not including the name that would have revealed everything. Gary slipped the ring onto her finger, and she felt the weight of it like an anchor in the best possible way. That night, in their small apartment, Gary carried her over the threshold even though they'd been living together for months. He held her close and whispered, I'm going to spend every day making you happy. That's my only job now. Isabella believed him. She believed in the life they were building, in the future they were creating together. She believed that maybe she could have this, normal, simple, real. She believed she could be just Terry, not Isabella Maria Rossi, not the heiress, not the hidden owner of luxury empires, just a woman in love with a good man, just a wife. She made the decision that night, lying in Gary's arms while he slept. She would keep her secret. She would protect this fragile, precious thing they'd built. She would let him feel strong and capable and needed. She would be the woman he thought she was. It felt like love. It felt like sacrifice. It felt like the right choice. Later, much later, she would understand that the biggest lies we tell are the ones we convince ourselves are kindness. That hiding yourself from someone isn't protection. It's the first crack in a foundation that will eventually crumble. But that night, wrapped in her husband's arms, Terry Walters believed she could have it all. The empire and the love, the power and the peace, the truth and the lie. She believed she could keep both worlds separate forever. She believed love was enough. The apartment became Isabella's entire world, and she made it beautiful in the quiet way only she knew how. While Gary went to consultations and meetings, she planted herbs on the windowsill, learned to bake bread from online videos, scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing. She created routines, rituals, the domestic rhythms of ordinary life. Every morning, she woke before Gary to make coffee using Elena's recipe. She'd watch him dress for work, adjusting his tie, kissing him goodbye at the door, like women had done for their husbands for generations. Then she'd return to the apartment, pull out her laptop, and run her empire from the kitchen table. Her managers knew to communicate through encrypted channels. Her board meetings happened through video conferences she took wearing business attire on top, pajama pants on bottom, Her lawyers sent documents to a private office she visited late at night when Gary thought she was at the gym. The world knew Isabella Maria Rossi as a reclusive heiress who rarely made public appearances, who conducted her business through intermediaries, who valued privacy above all else. Nobody knew that the heiress was currently scrubbing tomato sauce off a stove while humming along to the radio. The years passed like pages in a book Isabella didn't want to end. Gary's work grew steadily, not explosively, but with the kind of solid foundation he valued. He celebrated every small victory with the same enthusiasm, and Isabella celebrated with him, listening to stories about difficult clients and successful negotiations like they were the most important things in the world. "I'm thinking of expanding," Gary said one evening over dinner, his eyes bright with possibility. "Maybe bringing on a partner, taking on bigger projects. What do you think?" Isabella thought about the 15 commercial properties she'd acquired that month, about the hotel renovations she'd approved, about the international expansion her team was planning. Instead, she said, "I think you should do whatever makes you happy. I believe in you." And she meant it. She did believe in him, in his integrity, his work ethic, his genuine desire to help people find homes. The fact that his entire career could fit inside one line item of her monthly reports didn't make it less valuable. It just made her secret heavier. But the cracks were forming, small at first, easy to ignore. Gary started working later, coming home with stories about client dinners that ran long, about office emergencies that required his immediate attention. Isabella noticed the new cologne, the way he'd started going to the gym suddenly, caring about his appearance in ways he hadn't before. She noticed the distance during their anniversary dinner, the way he'd been somewhere else even while sitting across from her. She noticed how their lovemaking had become mechanical, obligatory, how he'd finish quickly and roll over claiming exhaustion. She noticed all of it, and told herself she was being paranoid, that successful marriages required trust, that loving someone meant giving them space. She told herself lies because the truth was too terrifying to face. Can you imagine the strength it took for Isabella to hide herself for 6 years? To run an empire while pretending to be ordinary? To love someone completely while showing them only half of who you are? Drop a comment below. Would you have revealed the truth earlier or kept the secret? If this story is hitting home, show some love by hitting that like button. And stay with me, because the confrontation you witnessed at the beginning, we're about to see how it all unfolded. Subscribe to Cedar Light Love Stories for more tales of hidden strength and epic revelations. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Elegant cardstock, embossed lettering, the gallery opening where Rossi would finally reveal her identity to the world. Isabella held the invitation in her hands and made a decision. 6 years of hiding was enough. 6 years of pretending was over. She would tell Gary everything. That night, at the gallery, she'd reveal herself as Rossi, and then, after the event, she'd take him home and show him the rest. The penthouse, the empire, the truth. She imagined his shock, his pride, his overwhelming love for the extraordinary woman he'd married. She spent the afternoon preparing Gary's favorite meal, braised short ribs that had been simmering since morning, roasted vegetables with herbs from their windowsill, the chocolate cake his mother used to make for his birthday. She set the table with candles, with the nice plates they only used for special occasions. She wore the deep green dress Gary had bought her 2 anniversaries ago, the one he said made her eyes look like forests after rain. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. She was lighting the last candle when her phone buzzed. An email from Dominique Laurent, her general manager at the Harrington Grand, her flagship property, her crown jewel. The subject line read, "Urgent. Discretion required." Isabella's stomach dropped before she even opened it. "Madam, I apologize profusely for disturbing you this evening, but circumstances require immediate notification. Mr. Gary Donovan has reserved the Royal Penthouse Suite for tonight. He arrived approximately 40 minutes ago with a female companion, estimated age late 20s, blonde hair, designer attire. He introduced her to the front desk staff as a special guest and requested our utmost discretion. The reservation is under his name with a credit card we have on file from a previous business event. Shall I proceed with standard service protocols, or do you require alternative arrangements? I await your instructions with absolute confidentiality. Respectfully, DL. Isabella read the email once. Then again, then a third time, each word carving itself into her brain like an epitaph. The apartment was suddenly too quiet. She could hear everything. The candles flickering, the food cooling, the clock ticking on the wall like a countdown to something inevitable and terrible. She stared at the green dress in the reflection of the microwave, at the woman she'd made herself into, at the perfect dinner growing cold. Gary had booked the Royal Penthouse Suite, the room that cost more per night than most people's monthly salary. The room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, with a private terrace and a bathroom carved from Italian marble. The room Isabella had personally designed, had overseen every detail of, had approved every fixture and finish, the room where she'd imagined bringing him someday, revealing everything, showing him the empire she'd built while loving him. Instead, he was there with another woman. He'd taken another woman to a room his wife owned, in a hotel his wife had built, under a portrait of his wife that hung in the lobby. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't destroying her. Isabella stood at the window and felt something inside her crystallize into ice. Not just hurt. That was too small a word. This was annihilation. This was the complete destruction of every belief she'd held about her life, her marriage, her choice to hide herself for love. She'd made herself small for him. She'd hidden her power, her wealth, her true self, all so he could feel like the man he wanted to be. And he'd repaid that sacrifice by taking another woman to her own hotel. She'd erased herself for him, and he'd erased her anyway. Isabella turned from the window and looked at the apartment, their home, their life, the beautiful lie she'd built with her own hands. She looked at the dinner growing cold, at the gift waiting on his plate, at the candles burning for a celebration that would never happen. She walked to the bedroom and changed. She pulled on the black suit she wore to hostile board meetings, tailored, severe, armor disguised as clothing. She twisted her hair into a tight bun that pulled at her scalp, welcoming the small pain as a distraction from the larger one. She put on the diamond earrings her grandmother had left her, the ones worth more than Gary earned in a year, the ones she'd hidden away because they didn't fit the image of the simple wife. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not the wife, not the heiress, something new and terrible, something forged in the space between who she'd been and who she was about to become. Isabella grabbed her keys, not to Gary's practical sedan, but to her own car, the one she kept in a private garage across town, the custom black vehicle she drove when she needed to remember who she actually was. The drive to the Harrington Grand should have taken 40 minutes. Isabella made it in 2003, pushing the car to speeds that would have gotten her arrested if anyone had the nerve to pull over a vehicle with her level of diplomatic plates. The city blurred past, lights streaking like tears she refused to shed. Her mind played out scenarios. Maybe Dominic was wrong. Maybe it was a colleague. Maybe there was an explanation, but Isabella hadn't built an empire by believing convenient lies. She'd built it by seeing truth clearly, no matter how painful. She pulled into the private entrance, the one reserved for her and her alone. Security nodded, their faces carefully neutral. Everyone knew. Of course they knew. The staff always knew everything. Isabella stepped into her private elevator, the one that went directly to the penthouse level, and watched the floors tick by. With each floor, she felt pieces of herself falling away. The softness, the hope, the naive woman who'd believed that hiding herself was the same as protecting her marriage. The elevator doors opened onto the penthouse corridor. Thick carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps. Soft lighting created an atmosphere of luxury and discretion. At the end of the hall, the door to the Royal Penthouse Suite stood closed, guarding whatever was happening inside. Isabella didn't approach it. Not yet. Instead, she took the stairs down one level to the mezzanine, to the spot where she could see the lobby below, where she could see the portrait of herself hanging behind the reception desk, backlit and unmissable. Isabella Maria Rossi, founder and CEO, Harrington Luxury Group. She waited. She didn't have to wait long. The private elevator doors opened, and Gary stepped out, his arm around a woman young enough to be startling, blonde, polished, wearing a dress that screamed money someone else had spent on her. She was laughing at something Gary had said, her head tilted back, her hand on his chest. Gary looked relaxed, happy, more alive than Isabella had seen him in years. They walked toward the front desk, and Isabella watched her husband's face as he glanced up at the portrait, watched the color drain from his skin like someone had opened a valve, watched his body go rigid. His hand dropped from the woman's waist, watched him understand in one terrible moment what he'd done, who he'd done it to. Isabella descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, her heels clicking like a countdown. Staff members saw her coming and scattered, suddenly busy with tasks that didn't exist. Guests sensed something happening and turned to watch. Gary spun around, and their eyes met across the lobby. Isabella saw everything in his face. The shock, the fear, the desperate scramble for an explanation that would make this okay. She saw the exact moment he realized there was no explanation, no words, no way out. She crossed the lobby floor, her stride measured and lethal. The blonde had finally noticed something was wrong, was looking between Gary and Isabella with growing confusion. Isabella stopped 3 feet from her husband, close enough to see the sweat breaking out on his forehead, close enough to smell another woman's perfume on his clothes, close enough to watch his world end. "Terry," he started, his voice cracking. "Terry, I can—" She slapped him so hard the sound echoed through 3 floors of the hotel. Guests gasped. Staff froze. The blonde stumbled backward. "You didn't cheat on a wife," Isabella said, her voice low and lethal, carrying through the sudden silence. "You destroyed the woman who loved you more than you ever deserved." Gary's hand went to his face, but his eyes stayed on hers. "Please, just let me—" "Let you what?" Isabella cut him off. "Explain? Apologize? Tell me it didn't mean anything." She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Do you have any idea where you are? Do you understand what you've done? Terry, please. Look up," she commanded, pointing at her portrait. "Look at it. Read it. Say it out loud." Gary's eyes went to the portrait, to the text beneath it. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Say it," Isabella repeated, steel in every syllable. "Isabella Maria Rossi," he whispered. "Founder and CEO," louder. "Isabella Maria Rossi, founder and CEO, Harrington Luxury Group." "That's right." Isabella stepped closer and Gary flinched. "Good. You brought your mistress to my hotel, to the suite I designed, in the building I own. You used money you have because I made sure you had opportunities. You built a career I quietly supported, and you repaid me by bringing another woman to my property." The blonde was crying now, scrambling for the exit. Isabella didn't even look at her. "How long?" Isabella asked. "Terry, please don't." "How long, Gary?" 6 months, he whispered. 6 months, half a year of lies, of coming home and kissing her with the same mouth, of letting her cook for him and care for him and love him while he was doing this. Isabella turned to the security team waiting at attention. "Remove him, both of them, permanently. Ban them from every property in the Harrington portfolio. All of them, worldwide." "Terry, wait." Gary reached for her. "Don't touch me." Her voice could have frozen fire. "Don't ever touch me again." She turned to Dominic, who'd appeared at her side. "Call my lawyers, all of them. I want every connection severed, every asset separated, every trace of him removed from my life. Tonight." "Yes, madam." Isabella looked at Gary one last time, memorizing the face of the man who'd broken her. "I gave you everything. Not money. I gave you me, the real me, the parts I never showed anyone. And you threw it away for someone whose name you probably can't even remember." "I love you," Gary said, tears streaming down his face now. "No," Isabella said quietly. "You loved the woman you thought I was. The small, manageable, grateful woman you could feel superior to. You never loved me. You don't even know who I am." She walked toward her private elevator, leaving him standing in the lobby of her hotel, in front of her portrait, surrounded by her staff, in the ruins of his comfortable delusion. The elevator doors closed, and Isabella pressed the button for the penthouse, not the suite Gary had booked, but her actual residence, the one that took up the entire top floor, the one no one knew existed. Only when she was alone, in the space where no one could see, did she allow herself to break. She sank to the floor in her expensive suit and cried, loud, gasping sobs that hurt her throat and chest. She cried for the woman she'd been on that train. Full of hope and possibility, she cried for 6 years of pretending, of making herself smaller, of believing that love was enough. She cried for the marriage she'd treasured and the man she'd loved who had never actually existed. Then she stopped crying. She stood up, washed her face, fixed her hair, and made the phone calls that would destroy Gary Donovan as completely as he'd destroyed her. The divorce papers arrived at Gary's temporary residence, his mother's cramped apartment in Queens, on a Tuesday morning. He opened them with shaking hands, reading words that dismantled his entire understanding of his marriage, his life, his reality. The document detailed everything. Every piece of financial support Isabella had quietly provided, every bill she'd paid without his knowledge, every opportunity she'd created for him that he'd attributed to his own skill and charm. The promotion he'd gotten 3 years ago, Isabella's anonymous recommendation to a board member she knew from the art world, the investment opportunity that had seemed like such a lucky break, arranged by Isabella's financial team. The car he drove, the watch he wore, the confidence he'd built on what he thought was his own success. All of it had been standing on foundations she'd built while he wasn't paying attention. Within a month, Gary's carefully constructed life had collapsed completely. His largest investor, upon receiving a quiet call from one of Isabella's associates, requested an immediate audit. When Gary couldn't produce the documentation he'd claimed existed, the investor pulled out. Other investors, spooked, followed. His credit cards, which had been subtly backed by Isabella's financial guarantees, suddenly hit their actual limits. Bills came due. Interest accumulated. The comfortable life he'd been living revealed itself as borrowed against a future that would never arrive. His biggest contracts were reviewed for compliance and mysteriously discovered to have issues. Not fraud. Isabella was too careful for that. Just problems. Enough problems that clients decided to go in different directions. Through it all, Isabella did nothing illegal. She simply stopped protecting him, stopped smoothing paths, stopped making opportunities appear. She removed her invisible hand from his life and watched him fall. The forensic audit revealed something Isabella hadn't known. Gary had forged documents to secure one of his larger loans, using property information he'd gotten from her casual mentions about neighborhood values. Not knowing she owned the properties, he'd represented himself as having insider knowledge in partnerships that didn't exist. It was fraud, small scale, probably motivated more by desperation than malice, but fraud nonetheless. Isabella could have kept it quiet, could have let it go, could have been merciful. She wasn't feeling merciful. She turned the information over to the authorities. Not directly, that would have been too obvious. Instead, she ensured it reached the right hands through careful channels. An anonymous tip, a concerned citizen. The system did the rest. Gary was arrested at his mother's house on a Tuesday afternoon. Elena called Isabella, begging her to help, to do something, to save her son. He made his choices, Isabella said quietly. Now, he lives with them. You loved him once, Elena sobbed. The woman I met loved him. That woman is dead, Isabella replied, and hung up. The trial was quick. Gary pleaded guilty, hoping for leniency. The judge, seeing a pattern of deception and financial irresponsibility, sentenced him to 2 years in minimum security. Isabella sat in the courtroom and watched him be led away in handcuffs. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw him mouth the words, "I'm sorry." She looked away. That night, alone in her penthouse, Isabella poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the window. She'd won. She'd destroyed him as completely as he'd destroyed her. Justice had been served. So why did she feel so empty? Why did winning feel like losing? Why did the woman in the window's reflection look so much like a stranger? She finished the wine and went to bed in the center of her enormous mattress, surrounded by luxury and success, and the kind of loneliness that money can't touch. She told herself this was closure. She told herself she could move on. She told herself that Gary Donovan was a closed chapter, a mistake corrected, a problem solved. She believed none of it, because somewhere deep inside, in a place she refused to acknowledge, Isabella knew the truth. Destroying him hadn't healed her. It had just made them both broken. Prison stripped Gary down to nothing. The facility was minimum security, a place for non-violent offenders, white-collar criminals, people who'd made mistakes but weren't considered dangerous. Gary shared a cell with a man who'd embezzled from his employer and spent their first night together comparing the ways they destroyed their own lives. The days blurred into routine. Wake at dawn, work in the kitchen, eat meals that all tasted the same, read donated books with broken spines, write letters he never sent, sleep on a mattress that felt like punishment. Gary had a lot of time to think. He thought about the train, about meeting Isabella when they were both just people with no history weighing them down. He thought about her laugh, the way she'd looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. He thought about their wedding, about the promises he'd made and believed with his whole heart. He thought about the moment he'd stopped seeing her. It happened so gradually he hadn't noticed. One day she was the woman he'd fallen in love with, full of mystery and depth. The next, she was just there, cooking breakfast, asking about his day, existing in the background of his life like furniture he'd stopped noticing. When had she become invisible to him? When had her presence become an expectation rather than a gift? He started therapy, even though it was optional, sat in a circle with other men and talked about the stories they told themselves, the lies that felt like truth, the ways they justified the unjustifiable. I thought I deserved more. Gary admitted one session, I thought I'd earned something better than what I had. I didn't realize I had better. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy looking at what I thought I wanted. The therapist, a tired woman who'd heard every excuse, nodded. Entitlement is a disease. It makes you blind to blessings because you're too focused on what you think you're owed. Gary read books on philosophy, on Buddhism, on the nature of suffering and desire. He read about ego and illusion and the ways we construct narratives that cast ourselves as heroes when we're actually villains. He wrote in a journal, filling pages with realizations that came too late. Isabella wasn't hiding from me. I was hiding from her. I was scared of her depth, her intelligence, her capacity for love that I knew I couldn't match. So I made her smaller in my mind. I turned her into just a wife so I could feel bigger. I betrayed her because I was afraid of how much greater she was than me. The months passed. Gary worked in the kitchen and learned that there was dignity in service, in doing something well, even when no one was watching. He started helping other inmates with their legal paperwork, using the knowledge he'd gained from his own disaster. He taught literacy classes to men who'd never learned to read properly, finding purpose in giving what little he had to offer. Elena visited once a month. She never mentioned Isabella, though Gary could see the questions in her eyes. She brought books and home-cooked food, and fierce, uncompromising love. You made a terrible mistake, she said during one visit. But you're my son. I don't give up on my son. Question is, are you going to give up on yourself? No, Gary said, meaning it. I'm not who I was. I'll never be that person again. Good, Elena said firmly. That person was a fool. Be better. Gary walked out of prison on a Tuesday morning carrying a plastic bag with his belongings and the name of a halfway house. His mother waited at the gates, older than he remembered. Her hair more gray, her face marked by worry that he'd put there. They hugged in silence. What was there to say? She drove him to a studio apartment in a building that had seen better decades. The charitable organization that helped former inmates had arranged it. Subsidized rent, basic furniture, A chance to rebuild. It's a start, Elena said, setting groceries on the counter. You'll make it work. Gary found work washing dishes at a diner, the kind of place where the coffee was cheap and the customers were cheaper. His manager was a woman who'd given chances to dozens of ex-convicts and believed in hard work more than second-guessing. I don't care what you did, she said on his first day. I care about what you do here. Show up on time, work hard, treat people with respect. That's all I ask. Gary showed up on time, worked hard, treated everyone with respect. He scrubbed pots until his hands cracked. He mopped floors until they gleamed. He took out trash and cleaned grease traps and did all the invisible work that kept the restaurant running. He didn't complain, didn't make excuses, didn't act like the work was beneath him, because nothing was beneath him anymore. He'd learned that the hard way. At night, he worked as a janitor in an office building downtown. He cleaned toilets and emptied trash cans and vacuumed conference rooms where people made in an hour what he made in a week. He didn't resent them. He'd been them once, oblivious to the people who made his comfort possible. On his days off, Gary started volunteering at a homeless shelter. It wasn't court-mandated. It wasn't part of any program. He just showed up one Saturday and asked if they needed help. They did. He served soup to people who'd lost everything, who lived on streets and in shelters, who carried their entire lives in shopping bags. He listened to their stories without judgment, recognized himself in their struggles, understood that the distance between his life and theirs was smaller than he'd ever imagined. You got kind eyes, one regular told him. Most volunteers, they look at us like we're projects. You look at us like we're people. We're all people, Gary said quietly. Some of us just get lost longer than others. 18 months after his release, Gary stood in a community arts center in the Bronx, teaching basic painting to teenagers who'd been written off by everyone else. The pay was barely enough to cover his rent. The work was exhausting and often heartbreaking. It was also the most meaningful thing he'd ever done. The center was run by a woman named Carmen, funded, though Gary didn't know it yet, by Isabella's foundation. When Gary first volunteered, Carmen had been skeptical. I don't need charity from guilty white guys trying to feel better about themselves, she'd said bluntly. I was married to Rossi, Gary had replied quietly. I lived with one of the greatest artists of our generation and never even noticed. I'm not here to feel better. I'm here because I finally understand what I was too blind to see before. Art matters. Giving people space to create matters. I want to help if you'll let me. Carmen had studied him for a long moment, then handed him a mop. You can start by cleaning the studio. We'll see if you're still here next week. He'd been there every week since. One evening, as he was locking up the art center, Carmen approached him. There's someone here to see you, she said, her expression unreadable. Gary turned and felt his heart stop. Isabella stood in the doorway, wearing paint-stained jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like the art student he'd thought he married than the millionaire artist she actually was. She looked older, more guarded, like she'd built walls that might never come down. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Isabella, he breathed. Marcus. Her voice was carefully neutral. Can we talk? They walked to a small park nearby, sitting on a bench beneath trees just beginning to bud with early spring. The silence between them was heavy with everything unsaid, everything broken, everything they'd both become since their world shattered. I've been watching you, Isabella said finally, not stalking, just keeping track. The art center, the work you're doing with those kids. I didn't know, Gary said quietly. I know. Carmen called me when you showed up. She runs the center with funding from my foundation. She wanted to know if she should send you away. Gary's throat tightened. What did you tell her? I told her to let you stay if you were genuine, to kick you out the second you made it about yourself. Isabella looked at him directly for the first time. You didn't. You just showed up and did the work. It's not enough, Gary said. Nothing I do will ever be enough to make up for what I did to you. No, Isabella agreed. It won't, but it's something. It's different than who you were. They sat in silence, watching children play on the nearby playground. their laughter a bright contrast to the weight of this conversation. "Why are you here?" Gary asked finally. Isabella took a shaky breath. "Because I've spent 18 months being angry, being hurt, being absolutely certain that you were irredeemable and I was justified in destroying you." She paused. "And then I saw you with those kids, saw you showing up week after week, not for recognition or redemption, but just because it mattered. And I realized you'd changed, really changed. That doesn't mean you have to forgive me. I know." Isabella's voice cracked slightly. "And I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure I know how to let someone that close again, knowing how much damage they can do." "Then why are you here?" Gary repeated gently. "Because I'm tired of carrying this alone," Isabella whispered. "The anger, the hurt, the loneliness of being someone no one actually knows. I built all these walls to protect myself, and they worked. I'm completely safe and completely isolated and completely exhausted." Gary wanted desperately to reach for her hand, to offer comfort, to bridge the distance between them. He didn't. He just waited, giving her space to find her words. "I don't love you anymore," Isabella said, and Gary felt the words like a physical blow. "Not the way I did. That woman who loved you died the night you brought her to my gallery. But I miss having someone who knew me, the real me. Even if you didn't know everything, you knew things no one else did. I want to know all of you now," Gary said softly. "The parts you showed me and the parts you hid. The artist and the woman, the empire and the person who built it. All of it. Why?" Isabella turned to face him. "Why now? When I'm not hiding anymore? When you can't feel superior because I'm pretending to be less than I am?" Gary held her gaze, letting her see the truth. "Because I finally grew up enough to understand that loving someone extraordinary doesn't make me less. It makes me lucky. Because I spent 18 months becoming someone who could appreciate what I had instead of being threatened by it. Because I was a coward then, and I'm trying not to be one now." Tears slipped down Isabella's cheeks. "You destroyed me, Gary. You took my trust and my love and my vulnerability. And you betrayed all of it for someone who didn't even know your last name." "I know." Gary's own eyes filled. "And I'll spend the rest of my life knowing that, carrying that, working to be worthy of the trust I'll never get back." "What if I want to give it back?" Isabella whispered. "What if I'm foolish enough to want to try again? What if I see who you've become and think, maybe we could build something honest from all these broken pieces?" Gary felt hope and terror in equal measure. "Then I'd say we start from zero, from the truth. No hiding, no pretending, no making yourself smaller to make me comfortable. You show me all of you. And I promise, I swear, I'll spend every day being grateful instead of intimidated." Isabella looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for lies, for performance, for any sign that this was manipulation instead of genuine transformation. "One mistake," she said finally, her voice steel wrapped in vulnerability. "One betrayal, one lie, one moment of you making me feel like I'm too much. And I'm done, forever, understood. And you have to meet me where I am, broken, angry, scared. You don't get the easy version of me anymore. I don't want easy, I want real." Isabella took a shaking breath and held out her hand. Not an embrace, not a kiss. Just a tentative touch, the smallest bridge across an enormous distance. Gary took her hand carefully, reverently, like it was the most precious thing he'd ever held, because it was. "I can't promise I'll ever fully trust you again," Isabella said softly. "I can't promise I'll ever fully forgive myself," Gary replied. "So where does that leave us?" Gary looked at the woman he'd married, betrayed, lost, and somehow, impossibly, been given another chance to know. Really know this time. Starting over. He said, "Building something honest, seeing if two broken people can create something whole." Isabella nodded slowly, her hand still in his, and for the first time in 18 months, she felt something besides emptiness. It wasn't love, not yet, maybe not ever the way it had been before, But it was possibility. It was choice. It was the terrifying, fragile hope that maybe some things, once shattered, could be rebuilt into something even more beautiful for having been broken. 3 years later, Isabella stood in her gallery. A different gallery, one she'd designed specifically for emerging artists who couldn't afford traditional representation, and watched Gary teach a class on art appreciation to a group of teenagers from the Bronx. He wasn't her husband. They'd agreed not to remarry, not to try to resurrect what had died. But he was her partner, her companion, the person who knew all of her now, the empire and the insecurity, the genius and the fear, the magnitude she'd hidden and the vulnerability she'd revealed. They'd rebuilt slowly, carefully, therapy together and apart, conversations that lasted until dawn, boundaries that were respected, trust that was earned in increments so small they were almost invisible, but real. Gary had never moved back into her world of wealth. He still lived modestly, still worked at the community center, still chose a life of service over comfort. But Isabella funded his programs, partnered with his vision, used her resources to amplify his impact. They were building something new, not a marriage in the traditional sense, but a partnership based on truth instead of illusion, on seeing each other completely and choosing every day to stay. It wasn't perfect. Some days Isabella still felt the ghost of betrayal, still flinched from vulnerability, still protected pieces of herself out of habit. Some days Gary still struggled with his own shame, still worked to prove he'd changed, still feared losing her again. But they showed up. They did the work. They loved each other with eyes wide open instead of closed. Gary looked up from his class and saw her watching, and his face transformed with the kind of joy that used to make her suspicious, but now just made her smile. "How'd it go?" she asked when he finished. "Maria just got accepted to the summer arts program you funded," Gary said, his whole face glowing. "Full scholarship." She cried when I told her. Isabella felt warmth spread through her chest. "You did that. Your recommendation made the difference." "We did that," Gary corrected gently. "Your program, my students, our partnership, our..." The word still felt fragile sometimes, but it was getting stronger. They walked out of the gallery together, hand in hand, into a city that had witnessed their destruction and their careful, improbable reconstruction. "I love you," Gary said quietly, like he said every day, without expectation of response. Isabella stopped, turned to face him, and said the words she still couldn't say easily, but meant completely. "I love you too." Not the innocent love of before, not the naive trust that had been shattered, but something harder, more resilient. Love that had been tested and broken and rebuilt. Love that knew exactly how much damage was possible and chose anyway. They walked home through the spring evening, two people who'd learned that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of the story, that people can change, that love can survive devastation if both people are willing to do the brutal, honest work of reconstruction. It wasn't the fairy tale Isabella had imagined on her wedding day. It was messier, more complicated, built on foundations of broken glass and careful forgiveness. But it was real, and real, Isabella had learned, was worth more than perfect ever could be. So here's what I want you to take from Isabella and Gary's story. If you're hiding yourself to make someone comfortable, stop. The right person will celebrate your magnitude, not be threatened by it. If you've been betrayed, know that your pain is valid. Your anger is justified, but your healing is your responsibility. No one else can do that work for you. If you've made terrible mistakes, real change is possible, not through words, through action, consistent, humble, daily action without expecting applause. And if you're wondering whether to give someone a second chance, trust your gut. But know the difference between someone who's sorry they got caught and someone who's genuinely become better. This story isn't just about a billionaire and her cheating husband. It's about every person who's ever felt invisible, underestimated, betrayed. It's about the choice to hide or be seen, the choice to destroy or rebuild, the choice to stay bitter or grow better. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. If you believe in transformation, redemption, and the messy, complicated reality of real love, subscribe to Cedar Light Love Stories, because we're bringing you narratives that don't just entertain, they transform. Drop a comment telling me, Team Isabella, Team Gary, or Team Starting Over. I want to hear your thoughts. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated doesn't define your worth, and that even the most broken things can be rebuilt into something beautiful. Thank you for being part of the Cedar Light family. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over. The best chapters might still be unwritten. Now go out there and be seen. Be real. Be extraordinary.